Welcome everyone to our Right to Repair panel at the Edmonton Public Library. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Dan and I am a makerspace assistant broadcasting to you from the fabrication lab at the Milner Library at EPL. And we're happy to host y'all and our panelists here today. A little bit of an initial acknowledgement. We are broadcasting here from Treaty 6, Alberta, Amisquichy, Waskagan, Edmonton. And this is the traditional and rightful lands of the Niitsitape Blackfoot Confederacy, the Hohe Nakota Assiniboine, the Yahe Nakota Sioux, the Nagawi Winnewag Soto, the Nehio Cree, Otapemsawag Métis, Dene, and Inuit people. And we're not sure where exactly the Zoom servers are situated on, whose lands they are, but given that we're broadcasting here, Edge Computing would probably say that they are probably also on stolen Indigenous land. Today, we are so lucky to have Michael Kulpa from the Edmonton New Technology Society, Alex Hindle from Bike Edmonton, and Beverly Gan from the House of So to talk a little bit about right to repair. I'm going to assume that most of y'all are familiar with right to repair, but as just a brief explainer, it's a social, economic, and political movement about essentially giving you agency over the items that you own. And this is gonna maybe be a bit silly, but there's old wuxia kung fu movie quote that I always think about when it comes to right to repair, and it's a weapon that you don't know how to use belongs to your enemy. And so I think that kind of comes into right to repair, because if you can't repair it, if you can't fix it, then it's essentially just a physical subscription service. And what are the affordances that allows? How does that constrict our agency as people that like to use tools, as people that like to use creative objects, as people that like to make things? And how does that intersect with issues of sustainability and politics and consumerism? We will get right into it. And without further ado, we'll have Michael, Alex, and Beverly each introduce themselves and their organizations. So thank you very much. And we will get started now, starting with Michael.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, my name is Michael. I have been a maker with the Edmonton New Technology Society for a long time. We opened in 2009, and what we do is we offer tooling, workspaces, and resources for our members to build and make things. So in our facility, we offer woodworking and metalworking, ceramics, electronics, 3D printing, laser engraving, and all sorts of other specialty equipment that isn't really practical for most people to own on their own. And so most of our members are coming in to work on their own projects, build, create, repair, whatever is kind of their main interest. So yeah, we're open 24/7. We just recently moved to a new location just on 142nd Street and 118th Ave, kind of in that area. So yeah, we've been growing lots since reopening. We've got about 125 members, and we're always looking to grow what we're doing. And if anybody would be interested in coming out, track us down on the web and book a tour. We'll take you through and show you around.
Thank you so much. And Alex?
Yeah, hello. I apologize if there's any noise. There seems to be a lot of furniture being moved just above me. I'm one of the two downtown shop managers with Bike Edmonton. And Bike Edmonton, some of you may be familiar with it as the Edmonton Bicycle Commuter Society. That was our old name. It's a local nonprofit. It's existed for quite a long time, since 1980. And essentially it exists to promote cycling, to make cycling as accessible as possible to people in Edmonton. And we do that in a number of different ways. The most visible is that we operate 2 community bicycle workshops. So you can come and basically learn how to fix a bike, find parts to fix your own bike, and just learn all sorts of things about bikes in general. But you can do work yourself. We can do it for you. We can do it with you. It's very much sort of focused on education, and very much kind of absolutely focused on sort of the idea that if you can repair it, it's much better than replacing it. We also do advocacy and education and events and many other good things, but I'm primarily involved in the community bike shop side of things.
Great, thank you. And Beverly.
Hi, I'm Beverly. I am the founder and an instructor at the House of Sew. I built this business back in late 2016, relocated back from the UK in 2014. I launched this business in response to my experience in the fashion industry, where there was high exploitation of students, and just the amount of fashion houses that are operating with free labor, and the amount of waste, and like focus on profit margin. So at the House of Sew, we teach everything to do with sewing from beginner to advanced. We've taught, domestic homemakers, children, those who actually want to kind of like get into the industry for themselves as well. So aspiring fashion designers, but it was built to kind of give people the opportunity to take things into their own hands. And instead of purchasing, you can create your own garments yourself without contributing to mass production, and anything to do with mending and repair.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. A bit about how we're going to structure this evening to all of the participants. We've got some questions that we've sent out to the panelists ahead of time, and we'll make our way through those. But also, if you have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat, or towards the end of our time, say around 8:15 or so, we'll start opening it up to more questions. We're big on kind of pursuing your curiosity in the library, so we don't want it to be too scripted or anything. And we just want to follow everyone's interest. But without too much ado, we'll get into it, starting with a question for Michael. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of repair tools you have at ENTS that are less accessible to most people, and which ones do you provide access to and your members?
Sure, yeah. I think it's probably going to be a similar answer for Alex and Beverly too. Probably the most valuable resource that our organization makes available to our members is other members who have experience and insight into whatever the repair is that they're working on, right? So thinking back, I would say most folks out there have somebody that they can turn to for, house maintenance and auto repair, right? They've got somebody in their life that they can call and say, I need to repair a hole in the drywall. What do I do, right? And they got somebody who can walk them through that, friend, family, anything like that. It gets a little bit less common when you're working with electronics or machinery or equipment like that. And so a lot of what we do is really just kind of pairing off members who have a skill set with somebody who is looking for a little bit of guidance, right? Of course, we do offer tooling and equipment. So our electronics lab, we've got soldering stations, hot air rework, or oscilloscopes if you're getting pretty far into the electronics side of things, if you were doing some logic analyzing or something like that. And that's great, but a lot of those tools are relatively affordable. If you wanted to get in, I know, Dan, you've got your set of soldering stations behind you there. They're not terribly expensive in the grand scheme of tooling, right? But if you're not using them regularly, or if you don't know how to use them, the $100 that it may take to get into a tool like that isn't really the limiting factor. It's knowing which one should I buy. There's 100 options out there. Is the $50 one good enough for me? Is the $200 one the better answer? How do you navigate that as somebody who's maybe never done any work in the world of electronics, or even in the world of machining? If we have to make a metal part, that's not something that a lot of folks would have experience or exposure to, right? As many folks are observing and seeing out there, a lot of the industrial arts programs in high schools have closed or been seriously scaled back. What folks used to get as part of a general education is really a specialty skill at this point, right? And so if you don't know somebody who can weld, your ability to, weld up a frame for a custom bike if you're doing maybe some adaptability changes for somebody with a disability, for example, you're going to be really limited in that, right? You can only buy whatever's off the shelf. So within our shop, we've got everything that you would expect for a lot of the standard repairs in a wood shop. So, saws, sanding, chisels, drills, impacts, all that kind of stuff. But really having somebody that you can turn to and say, I've got this broken chair. This is why it broke. When I sat down this way, or my little one was maybe climbing on it in a way they weren't supposed to. What's the best way to repair it, right? Because if you got some cracked wood, you might just pour some glue down the crack and clamp it closed, hope for the best. But depending on where that is in the piece of furniture, for example, that may not hold. You might need to reinforce it somehow, and the advice on how to best reinforce it is really a hard thing to put into Google, because what you want to do is say, here's my exact item, here's where it broke, here's the forces that I'm expecting it to see. What do you think? And that's not something that you can really do without a little bit of some guidance from somebody who can look at it with you and say, all right, well, let's pull it apart. Let's peel and push and pull and see what the forces are like on this particular break or damage, and then repair it appropriately, right? So I would say the community is really our greatest asset. There's often folks in there asking about, how do I paint metal? Painting metal is a skill. I'm sure Alex has gone through it before, and surface prep is probably the key thing, right? But that's not going to be the answer that you get when you Google. People are going to talk to you about welding dissimilar metals or brazing or any type of other skill, right? But what you really want is somebody who can take you through that full experience in a guided fashion, which is really, really valuable in a world with a lot of disposable equipment. Having somebody walk you through it and be like, this isn't actually that hard, we can do it. So I'd say that's probably our greatest thing. But outside of that, we have all the regular tools you'd hope to see and find. But really, really opening that up to the team and the members is really where it's at.
Okay, I am going to jump on that then, because
Sure.
I think something that we talk about or maybe lose sight of in the library is that there's so many places and sort of like knowledge media that aren't just contained within what we think of as containing knowledge: books, movies, documentaries, audiobooks, things like that. And so Alex and then Beverly, can you talk a little bit about what you've noticed in terms of skill sharing and just like the human aspect of sharing these kinds of repair knowledges in your organizations?
Within our sector, because I like to say that there's no right way or wrong way. There's just a better way or an easier way, a more efficient way. Because if you really wanted to, you can do it. You can just figure it out. And even if it's just a hack job, at least you put that button back on. It's just really surprising when people come to us about things like that, where they say, I don't know, I don't even know how to sew a button. But then you're able to try to fix, I don't know, like something that means a lot to you. I don't know, like maybe like I'm trying to describe, what am I trying to describe right now? I want to say something kind of expensive that you don't want to pay for the repair. So you're going to try to Google it and like hack it yourself. But like a button, something so simple like a button, people are like, I don't know, I'm lost, I don't know how to do this. When you could just go back to the garment and just kind of like dissect it and put it back together again. And so in terms of skill sharing, there's always an easier way. We have multiple ways of doing things. There isn't just one way of doing something. And even for myself, I've gained a lot of knowledge throughout the industry, from tailors to my instructors. I'm still learning from even students that have picked up something or read something or seen something somewhere, where they're like, oh, my grandma taught me how to do it this way. And I'm like, oh, that is an easier and faster way of doing something. So having that sort of communication and that open line of, it doesn't matter how much knowledge you have about something, you don't you never know, like you might actually have some valuable piece of information that's going to work for somebody else. So in like sewing circles and stuff like that, sitting around a table and doing the act of mending itself, a lot of conversation comes up and a lot of technique conversations come up, which is really nice to be able to share that. Don't really have anything else to add to that. That's usually our case when it comes to mending. It's usually a sit down and there's no right way or wrong way. There's just usually a better or an easier way.
Interesting.
That rings true for me too, with my experience kind of with bike repair and operating or sort of supporting, because we are very much a volunteer-run facility supporting the bike shop here. People can easily get hung up on the the right way to do something, and yes, with something like bikes, there usually is going to be a some degree of right or wrong, but it's rarely quite as black as white as people think. And I do think that a lot of people are quite intimidated by the thought of making a mistake, of damaging the bike, of doing something that's going to lead to an accident. And I don't want to say that nothing matters, just get in there and start poking at it with a screwdriver, but it really is the case that very few things you can do are going to cause permanent damage. It's a lot less, it's a lot lower stakes, say, than working on a car or something like an airplane. It's all very much out in the open. And yeah, again, to echo what Michael and Beverly have said, like a tremendous amount, I think, of the benefit of a place like Bike Edmonton is just that connection to other people. Everybody has a different learning style. Some people are able to watch YouTube videos and apply that skill immediately. Other people need to, kind of just go at their own pace, hands-on, feel it out. And still other people need to kind of be there in the flesh, seeing a demonstration, talking it over. And, I find what we often will see is this people that overestimate their skill, and just having sort of a variety, a diversity of volunteers to kind of match people's needs in terms of learning, and just give that human connection and do it in a friendly place, supportive place. I think it goes a long way and it is valuable.
That makes a lot of sense. And so one thing that y'all have really kind of illuminated is this idea of social benefit and the kind of community building that comes with skill sharing and things like that. And another benefit that's commonly brought up with right to repair is the idea of sustainability. And so starting with Alex and then maybe moving to Beverly, because I think there's an interesting contrast between how biking is perceived sustainably and how the fashion industry is perceived sustainably. Let's talk a little bit about how does right to repair fit within cycling and making cycling more or less sustainable.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so long story short, it absolutely makes it more sustainable. Bikes are, relatively speaking, very sustainable. And, there's an ongoing kind of sniping and griping about e-bikes and various things like that, in terms of, oh, well, are these, actually a problem environmentally? Is this pure, like in the same sense that some people see, a human powered bike as, but, regardless whether it's an e, like these options are all vastly more sustainable in terms of the energy involved in the manufacture and the shipping and the maintenance and the use, than any kind of motorized vehicle, including electric vehicles, just vastly more energy efficient. When it comes to bikes, they also really promote kind of the design or thrive within spaces that are sustainably designed, sort of denser, more human scaled, and yeah, I mean, another thing with bikes to consider, I guess, is that over time that there have been there has been a transition away from bikes that would have been more made domestically in Canada or in North America, out of materials like steel, towards bikes that are made overseas out of materials like aluminum, carbon fiber, or some combination thereof often. And it's true that, like, you know, the sort of life cycle, the energy used in the manufacturer, and just kind of the longevity of these bikes typically has decreased with time. So that is something to sort of be aware of. But bike, you're definitely doing something right from a sustainability perspective. And if you are taking care of your bike, you know, and especially not to pick on aluminum bikes or carbon bikes, they're great in a lot of ways, but steel bikes especially tend to, if taken care of well, if repaired well, tend to last a very long time. You know, there's no reason they can't last sort of 50 plus years. That's not likely true of a carbon frame. But being able to repair that bike sort of over the course of its life cycle, well, it can dramatically increase its life cycle, and it's you know, you're going to be putting inputs in new chains, brake pads, various other things, but you're still kind of using that same frame and a lot of the components that are sort of the higher energy input ones to manufacture. So being able to kind of fix something yourself is very much adds and complements to the sustainability of bikes. And some people, you know, would have you believe otherwise. You do unfortunately often get told that it's simply better to buy a new bike if you have an old decent bike that does need some repair, but is by no means, you know, irreparable, just because it is a bias I think people have, either coming from a place of wanting to sell somebody a new product, or just from that sense that a lot of people in certainly in the West have, that if something's kind of past a certain age, it must be no good. But yeah, bikes are a eminently repairable object.
Great. And turning to you, Beverly, if you want to answer the same question and also allude to a little bit of what Alex did in terms of whether you've seen trends in the fashion industry, which often I think many of us have heard about, fast fashion and shine and things like this, whether you've seen trends become more sustainable or less, more repairable or less over time, especially recently.
I feel like the industry is just so complicated and messy, and as much as there are a lot of companies that offer like buyback programs and things like that, where they will purchase back what you've bought from them, and they'll give it some new life, either by giving it a new dye, or like repurposing it, mending it, and then reselling it. That's kind of still keeping it a bit circular. And it is much more sustainable than buying something from like H&M, wearing it once, throwing it out. I think Patagonia also does a very similar program, and there are a few companies that offer mending for life, especially in denim, but not so much anywhere else. I think most companies that say that they're committed to it, I think the percentage is like 60% of companies are committed to doing like a net zero type of structure, implementing that structure into their company. But the number is like maybe only 4% that are actually existing and doing it. And with fashion, it's kind of hard, because at the end of the day, we're selling vanity, and the easiest way to have people understand who we are is by our appearance. Like, you know, first impression is everything. So people are constantly changing garments and stuff. So much of it is petroleum based. So a lot of the textile fibers are petroleum based, plastic. It won't, you know, it will be over 100 years before it even biodegrades. So every piece of garment that we've made from a petroleum-based product, a synthetic product, still exists on this earth. And the only way for it to be sustainable is if we just stop making clothes. I don't see any other way. Like we would have to stop making clothes for, who knows, 200 years or something like that before we kind of have a reset. There are, that being said, there are companies like Frankie Collective out in Vancouver. They do a lot of reworks. So they'll purchase either old vintage or dead stock material, and they will repurpose it into something new. We don't really consider that circular, because anytime you have to cut something up to remake it into something else, it technically, yes, maybe it's sustainable. I guess we would consider that recycling, but it's technically still not circular, and it still proposes like some sort of textile waste. What else can I say about that? It's just a very, very messy industry. I don't know how it can be better. I stepped outside of it because of that. My company would be run with profit margins in mind, which means that I'm going to have to always overproduce every single year just to make more profits, and that's not sustainable, because at some point that is going to crash as well. So with big companies, I don't really understand how that can continue, aside from the fact that they don't care, right? I think right to repair is, like you said, it's sustainable, but it's also a revolution. It's like a revolt against capitalism, consumerism, that, overconsumption, that sort of thing. The only way for the fashion industry to even reset itself is if there are no new designers coming in and we do not produce anything new.
I think that's a huge gauntlet that you've thrown down, and I really appreciate you doing that. You can see in sort of greenhouse gas emissions over time, if you go to Our World in Data, which is hosted by Oxford University, you can see since the industrial era, just steadily increasing emissions. And the only times they've really gone down is during economic degrowth. Unfortunately, those are typically economic shocks right now. But if there's a lot of dialogue about if we can intentionally and gracefully degrow, that would be a different method of intentionally decreasing emissions. And something that both you and Alex touched on that I think is really interesting is this idea of supply chains and how massive and global they've become. So I don't know, Michael, if you want to talk about in the equipment that you purchase and buy for ENTs, whether you have to kind of negotiate or manage or navigate your way through these global supply chains, and what you're kind of looking for when you're looking for equipment for your space that can repair things, and also to make it repairable itself as well.
Yeah, a lot of our equipment ends up being more industrial in nature. And so as a result, it's not susceptible to the same limitations that you see in a lot of the consumer stuff. So any of the tooling that you're going to buy from, Home Depot or Canadian Tire or anything like that is going to fall pretty squarely into that disposable category, where when it breaks, there's really not much you can do. There's so few parts, and everything is so tightly integrated into the smallest, lightest, cheapest package that they can manufacture, that once any one thing of it goes sideways, you're pretty hard pressed to repair it. But as you step up into the larger industrial equipment, anything that would be used in a production facility to generate revenue, that's not nearly as acceptable of an answer, right? So on bigger saws, on bigger tooling like that, they're still available with fully exploded diagrams that will list every single part on that machine with a part code and a serviceability set on it. And so that is something that we do look for, but it's more of an accident when we are buying bigger tools. We're buying a bigger tool just in the way that we operate our space, because we are a community workshop. we're looking to attract folks who want to use our tooling. And, if I pick on Alex here and say, Alex has got a wood shop in his garage, I can't really compete with Alex's convenience of walking across the back lawn to the garage by offering the same tooling, right? So what we do is we offer quite a bit bigger equipment, right? So it's going to have a little bit more features, a little bit more capacity, whatever that is, right? That kind of pushes that into that industrial zone. And then Alex is going to be looking at his project and thinking, I might be able to do this with my, Canadian Tire Home Depot option, but it would be dramatically easier, or I'd get a better result, or maybe it's not possible at all to use with these kind of consumer level tools. And then, he'd want to join Ants and kind of work with our tooling. So that is something that we do, but it's really more of a function of the type of equipment that we buy. So that's kind of more in the industrial side of tooling. As far as things like software or more digital electronic type things, a lot of what we focus on is going to be on the interoperability. And because of that, it's really, we want to be able to tie our systems together so that our members can make use of them across our facility, right? So that really lends itself a little bit more to the open source side of things, as opposed to the closed and proprietary, which is maybe a larger discussion that we might, touch on a little bit later. For us, being able to integrate one system into another has a lot more benefit than maybe having the slickest, nicest version of something that is in its own walled garden, right? So, we're always keeping it in mind when we're shopping, but really our main focus is going to be on the capacity and the tooling, right? We ultimately have to deliver the right equipment, whether that's, serviceable in a traditional way, or maybe it needs something a little bit more involved to repair is maybe a bit different. So yeah.
I really like that you touched on interoperability, because I feel like it's come up a couple times already, and I feel like that is one of these huge components of right to repair is being able to have not these proprietary parts that won't fit specific frames. So turning to Alex, and then actually turning to Beverly, because I guess like fabric and needle and thread, those are one of the oldest interoperable systems known to humanity. But maybe going to that after, starting with Alex, have you seen, like, bikes in many ways are still recognizable from the original safety bike 150 years ago. And a lot of what's made them so easy to repair is the interoperability of forks with the frame, with the pedal set and things like that. Have you seen bike manufacturing go towards or away from interoperability? Are there specific, maybe we don't want to advocate for brands and companies in this forum, but are there specific things to look out for when buying a bike if you want it to be repairable? And can you just talk a little bit more about that in cycles?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, fundamentally, like you said, bikes are very similar now, as they were at the sort of turn of the 20th century and earlier. And that's one of the wonderful things about them, I think, is that it seems as though we stumbled upon this thing that's quite wonderful, and haven't really fundamentally changed it much since, and I've continued to just find it very useful. But depends how the bike companies are constantly trying to push the envelope, make better bikes, improve the riding experience, and they're doing that by improving technology, and that's going to, of course, lead to things having to change, standards and different parts and so forth. You could also say, well, they're just trying to make money, and this is how they've figured out how to do it, is kind of that planned obsolescence, or just artificial pushing for change that's not necessary. I think, yeah, to give a clear answer, the fairly clear trend that we're seeing, and it's been going on for quite a while, but it seems to me to have been accelerating a lot in the last decade, is towards more variety of specifications, more parts. Often you'll see things change kind of within the same bike, or the same bike model, but just year over year. And there is sometimes an obvious benefit to these things, but often there isn't necessarily. Something that is a person involved in community bike shop is very frustrating is what we often will call bike shaped objects, BSOs. And I know that can kind of sound a little bit snotty, but it's not meant as in a sort of like looking down our noses way. The truth is that a lot of bikes that you can buy at sort of like big box outlets and things like that, they'll often really, the makers of these bikes will prioritize kind of trying to make them as flashy as they can, trying to make them look as though they have all the modern specifications. They'll want to have them often, full suspension, disc brakes, all of these things, but at a very low price point. And the way they do that is by offering bikes that are typically, not always, but typically very low quality and often poorly assembled. And so those are the kinds of things where, if you want something that you ride a couple of times a year around the block, that might be great for you. But if you want a bike that's going to last you a long time and that you can repair and can get a lot of enjoyment out of, and that is a nice, safe, pleasant ride, then I'd stay away from that kind of bike. You'd be much better off getting an older used bike that is probably quite affordable, but probably very well designed and can last a long time. There's nothing wrong with getting a new bike, with a sort of very modern parts, getting something with 12 speeds in the rear, or like, have to be aware that kind of thing costs more to repair, often does not last as long, and depending on the how popular these types of standards become that they rely on, parts for these types of things may or may not be available in the future. So my suggestion would be to get an older, and it doesn't have to be 30 years old, but just, you can even get a brand new bike. There's lots of bikes still out there that are simpler, more basic, that have kind of 8 to 9 speed drivetrains. And I'm referring to the rear. So, 8 speed would be 24 if you've got 3 in the front, 8 in the back. Mechanical disc brakes are great, V brakes are great. So you can get bikes with simpler parts that for many people work really well and are a lot easier to fix than some of the higher end stuff. That would be my suggestion.
That makes sense. So Beverly, I think it's like pretty, I don't know, from a layperson's perspective, easy to think about clothing and textiles as like, well, it's still pretty interoperable, right? It's like textiles and needle and thread, but now stuff like micro seam allowances and technical fabrics, do you think that's still the case?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Just is modern clothing manufacturing, like, obviously it feels like it should be pretty still pretty interoperable. Let's say if you've got a sewing machine, if you've got thread, if you've got fabric, it should be pretty easy to repair things. Do you find modern garments are still very repairable in that way, or has that changed at all?
If we're talking about like as a person at home doing it, there are some things like with tech fabrics and stuff. If you don't have that machine, it's quite difficult to do, just because that machine in an industrial setting only does that one specific type of seam. So I'll use Lululemon garments, for example. A lot of activewear, they use something like a flat seam, which you wouldn't have this machine. Even I don't have this machine, and probably will never really own it because I won't use it that often. But that machine is several $1,000s and upwards, if like in an industrial setting. So things like that, you can do a version of that seam, or you could send it to somebody. So for you to repair it yourself, you can still do it. You just won't have that exact finish. When we're going into like stretch fabrics, that does become a little more difficult to repair because it is a loop structure. So basically, most of our garments with woven, it's a basket weave. So I'm pretty sure everyone has like made a basket before in elementary, where you just get a bunch of different strips and you just weave it in and out, in and out. So that structure is really easy to recreate and to like patch up. But anything that has a loop structure, anything that's stretchy, tends to once you get a hole in your t-shirt, it could just get bigger and bigger, and in most cases it's stretched out and it loses its structure, and most people don't really want to repair that, and you can't really repair it as nicely. You could take it to someone professionally to recreate that structure seamlessly. It is quite pricey to get someone to recreate that fabric, so I think that's what deters people to kind of take that to somebody, to a professional to do, and then to do it yourself. It, unless you're really skilled, it never looks perfect. Like, you can tell that it's been mended. So you can do creative mending. And I guess that's down to preference. Some people like the aesthetic, some people don't. For the most part, you know, a needle is still a needle, thread is still thread. There may be some technological like advancement in terms of how sturdy it is, but everything is still the same. There may be a few new tools to help things, to help your process like go a lot easier, but a sewing machine is still a sewing machine. Nothing really changed about that. You might be able to get something that does embroidery or like an all-in-one type of thing. But in most cases, it is still pretty much the same. Just tech fabrics is the thing where it becomes a little more difficult to repair on your own.
And so with those difficult to repair tech fabrics, or as Alex was saying, the different sizes that manufacturers are introducing, this is increasing the amount of unusable parts, let's say, and waste. And Michael, you had mentioned that you had something to say about the waste that's created in these ways, whether it's e-waste or material waste.
Yeah, I mean, maybe tying back a little bit more to Alex's comment there on bike repair. A lot of the e-bike companies, similar to like Uber or Lyft or Bird, all that kind of stuff, they've popped up all over the world. Not so much in the colder climates like we have here, but you know, definitely in Asia, they've got just an absolute glut of companies that started an e-bike rental, you know, fleet, put out a couple 100,000 bikes, and then something went wrong with their business model somewhere along the line, and then they folded. And those bikes are now locked, right? You can't do anything with them because they need the app or whatever to unlock them and power them and charge them and pay for them. And so that's all garbage, right? The frame is garbage, the wheels are garbage, the batteries are garbage, and all the electronics in them are garbage. So there are quite a few open source projects out there to take those, you know, discarded bikes and e-bikes and scooters and try and basically replace the control modules on them. But there's a lot of challenge in getting the bikes out of their, you know, garbage piles and recycling facilities and then back into the hands of somebody who has that interest and aptitude to recertify, reproduce them in a way that would work. So you know, the simple designs of a traditional, you know, two-wheel, two-gear bike with a derailleur is something that I'm sure, you know, Alex and the team at Bike Edmonton are able to work with. But if somebody like Bird or anything like that decided they didn't want to be in the Edmonton market anymore, in all likelihood, they would probably just abandon their fleet here, right? And now our municipality is going to be left with that just enormous amount of e-waste, or, you know, the bikes that get vandalized, right? So if something gets thrown off a bridge into the North Saskatchewan, it's not going to be worth their time to service and repair that. But somebody like, you know, Bike Edmonton might be able to take something from that and really make a usable outcome from it.
Yeah, that's definitely something that comes up that kind of frustrates resilient communities, is this idea that corporations oftentimes have no plan of continuity for if they go bankrupt or anything. There's like kind of one of the most egregious examples that happened, I think, in 2022 was a bionic eye implant company went under and bricked all of its eye implants, leaving a lot of people with visual disabilities kind of like out to lunch, so to speak, which was pretty reprehensible. So can you talk a little bit about maybe starting with Alex and then moving to Beverly and Michael, whether how you see repairing your specific organization's area of expertise, bikes and clothing and electronics, how that builds community resiliency.
Yeah, I like to think of the bike shops that we run as community spaces. I think our mandate, if you kind of look at our societal objectives, I'm paraphrasing, but it very much is to make bikes accessible, especially to newcomers and marginalized populations. And I think we do a not perfect, but pretty good job of making most people feel welcome and getting people help to kind of get riding. And then along with that, there is just a tremendous sense of, I think, often of camaraderie. And it's really nice to be able to help somebody get a bike and experience what honestly is, freedom that comes with having a bike. I think that sharing, not just the knowledge of how to repair these things and the sort of culture of repair, but also the culture of cycling and the culture of self-sustainable, being, just teaching that sort of sense that yes, you can, not only can you ride a bike and thereby maybe subvert's too strong a word, but get around a lot of the frustrations, the limitations, and just downright unpleasant parts of life in a big city if you're having to drive, or I think transit's great, but it's not always as pleasant as cycling. You can get around these things, but you can also just get a sense of capacity, I think, through having a bike, and to be encouraged to find that and access it and be part of it, within a community, whatever community that might be. You could be a road racer, you could be a person who has very limited means and is using their bike because they have no alternative. You could be out there bike packing, or you could just enjoy cycling, but to feel a sense of community just from biking, but then also from that sense of being able to know that if you need to, you can repair your bike. I think that's a really good way to encourage resiliency, just through shared passion, and especially for something that is I think fundamentally about kind of freedom.
I guess with the House of So, this was kind of my platform to educate on all things sustainable and ethics, just because there's a huge supply chain issue within fashion. Unlike, metal parts like bike parts or computer parts, we don't have a machine that does the work. It is still human operated in the industry. Human labor is still the cheapest labor, and there is still a lot of slavery within fashion. A lot of information disappears when it's going from agent to agent before it reaches a business. So something like a roll of fabric, a lot of the times, if they say unknown fiber, that information has been lost, or they're not letting you know what that information is, so it can't be traced back to the factory it came from. So usually, we hear about people making, a penny, 2 cents a day or something like that, to make that roll of fabric. So with House of So, it's educating on responsible consumerism. Like, do we really need that item? And every item that we purchase, it is our responsibility as well. Yes, we have to hold companies responsible with production and not just producing with capital in mind, but also as consumers, if we weren't demanding these products, companies probably wouldn't be as likely to make products as quickly as they do. So with House of So, I like to talk a lot about things to do with ethics. And just when you go shopping for an item, to ask yourself, is it really necessary to have that piece? And is there an alternative method I could gain this piece, whether it's shopping at Valley Village or hosting a clothing swap or borrowing. I know when I moved back, I decided I'm not going to buy any new clothes. And if I need something, I'm going to either have to make it or figure it out. Now I've accumulated things from like clothing swaps and by thrifting or finding things in a bin or something like that. But in terms of new clothes, I haven't really purchased many new items in the last 10 years, just because the thought of having to give my money to somebody else so that they can add more waste into the world, it doesn't really make me feel good about myself. It doesn't feel like a very responsible thing. So in terms of how I approach it, it's all about educating on ethics and like responsible consumerism.
I just want to go back to something you said, because I think it's really interesting, in that I think society has a bizarre way of gendering certain activities and stuff. So you just mentioned clothing swaps, and something that I've noticed within Edmonton, at least, it might be very different in other places, but there are typically a lot of femme-gendered clothing swaps, but not so many male gendered clothing swaps. Or say Michael could speak a little bit maybe about how electronics repairs can be a gendered space. Can each of you, starting with Michael, talk a little bit about how your organization overcomes those sort of barriers, perceived barriers or very real legitimate barriers to people entering spaces that are gendered in certain ways?
Yeah, it's definitely something that our group struggled with a lot more when we first started out. When ENTS really opened, we were more electronics, woodworking, and metalworking. But maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we really started working into the world of pottery and ceramics, and that has really balanced out our gender diversity. And we're about 50-50 at this point. So the nice thing with that is that because our organization is a single membership for our group, we don't have a membership to our pottery studio and a separate membership to our woodworking studio or electronics or anything like that. So what ends up happening is we have the traditional gender bias that exists for any number of reasons, where maybe more ladies and women are going to be interested in the pottery side, and more men would be into the woodworking and electronics and metalworking. But now they have a little bit more of a permeability to walk across the shop and say, hey, I've got this project, this issue, this problem, this idea. Can somebody help me with that? And really explore it. So that's a nice inter-organization organic change that we're seeing, where folks are able to just throw up their hand and ask for help. But even outside of that, we've been seeing more net new members joining for woodworking that are going to be identifying as female, right? So part of that is going to be maybe more social norms are changing, hopefully, but also some of the most recent members that we toured through, they mentioned that they had taken a course, an evening course, kind of a hobby level course at NATE, and they said that the majority of the class was women, wanting to get out there and learn some stuff. So when we were able to open up our studio and say, come practice what you've learned, that's really nice. And then a lot of it comes down to I can only speak so much. I don't have that same experience as maybe a female, but I would hope that when a prospective member comes through our space who is either a female or a minority in some way that wants to, get into something, if they see other folks who are maybe more representative of their background or their history already working in there, that makes it more approachable. We definitely don't want to present the 1950s experience of a factory where it's men with cigarettes hanging out of their mouth and denim overalls just kind of working away at machines, and that's not very approachable. We really want everything in our space to be approachable by everybody. So it seems to be changing a little bit, but it's tough to know how much of that is a self-selecting bias based on the folks who reach out to us, right?
With us, yes, it is more female identifying that is more dominant, but we do also actually get a lot of males in our classes. I don't really, yes, I think there was a point in time where it was, you would think about like your grandmother or like your mom would do this sort of traditional craft, but within the industry, it is actually very male dominated. A lot of the more male designers, everyone who works in the company on the manufacturing side, in terms of like management, tailors and stuff like that are predominantly male actually. You see more females in on the manufacturing side, like actually doing the sewing, but maybe because it typically lands in like a poorer country. But in terms of, I would say North America, even the UK and Europe, you kind of see a mix of everybody. I know for myself, I teach anywhere from age 7 and as old as age 70. And the 70-year-old was an older gentleman. So we get a mix. Everything we do for most of our classes, especially the beginner classes and things like that, it's all gender neutral. So there is no real like deterrent, like you're not going to make something that you can't wear for yourself when it comes to beginner sewing. And even when we do our intro to garment making, we offer a femme and a mask fit. So whichever one you prefer. For most of our garment making classes, there may be a few where it's gender specific on like one of our tailored jackets, or if it's a dress or whatever. But even then, it's not, clothing doesn't really have a gender. It's just the way we view things. And we labeled them, we've labeled a dress to be something females, girls wear, but really the clothing, like the item itself doesn't have a gender. So technically anybody can make it or wear it.
Yeah, that's very true with bikes too. We often will have people who say, well, I'm getting older. I need a bike that's a bit more upright, something I can step over more easily. And we'll very often show them to a sort of a step through frame, and they'll say, well, that's a woman's bike. I'm a man, I need a man's bike. And it's exactly that. It's like, no, the bicycle doesn't care. If you see it as a woman's bike, that's the way you're looking at it, but it's might be the right technological, design solution that you need. But yeah, I just jumped in there. We finished, Beverly, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Are historically pretty masculine spaces. And it's not uncommon to still see a group of guys standing around in denim overalls, smoking cigarettes in the shop. No, I'm kidding. I'd say we are definitely biased a bit towards the male or the masculine, but I think much less so than we used to be. I've been involved for a long time, since the mid. I would say I wish I had hard numbers. I don't have them with me, but I think more women identifying people, a lot more diversity in general in the shop than we used to. Some of that, I think, is just things changing, biking appealing to more people generally, and to more women, for sure. We also have done things that we want to intentionally to try and encourage just more people, more diverse people in general, but more women also to come and use the shop. I don't want to generalize, but I think one thing we have done is, in the past, we very much said we're plainly and purely a do-it-yourself space. We'll kind of give you some guidance, we'll show you what to do, but we won't do the work for you. And if we do the work, we'll kind of undo it so that you have a chance to do it. But we're not really going to get too involved beyond giving guidance. And we have changed that quite a bit. We do absolutely still offer DIY space, and a lot of people really benefit from it and like it. But we also do DIT, do it together, which is exactly what it sounds like. You're coming in and you're doing the work, but sort of with somebody working alongside you, hands-on, showing you kind of how to do things. And we also do full service repairs. That's something that we started to do out of necessity during COVID, and we've kept it because we find that it does really appeal to a different segment of the population. Not necessarily women, but just people that either don't have the time or inclination to get into bike repair, or perhaps that do find it interesting and would like to get into it, but just are a little bit insecure, a little bit uncertain. So often we'll have people come in, they'll have us do the work, but they'll want to watch, they'll want to talk it over as we're doing it, understand what's going on, and then you'll often see those folks come back and try, do it together or do it yourself after that. And I think that this is definitely something that has brought more women into the shop. We certainly try to have a good mix of volunteers, and we do have a lot of, well, 2 of the 3 shop managers we have are women, and I think that helps send a good message. And it's cheesy and it's heartwarming though, nonetheless. I have seen on many occasions like young women and girls kind of very obviously like intrigued by my coworkers, just seeing these people in this space, and you can kind of see the gears going in their heads. And based on the comments they've made, I know that they were thinking, well, I never considered that that's something I could get into. I guess I can. Again, sounds a little cheesy, but it's true. So we definitely have a lot of work ahead of us, and I think can make a lot of improvements. But I think things are heading in the right direction with Bike Edmonton in that regard. It's nice to see it.
Awesome. Well, that's great to hear in all of your organizations. I'm starting to see some real hunger in the questions in the chat for some questions, and I think there's some really good ones in there. So we'll segue into that. And these questions are, unless otherwise stated, open to all 3 of you. If you want to take turns offering them, we'll start with an easy one, which is, what is the most common repair you see people coming in to make in your organization? And what do you think that says about the repair, the people that is so frequently being repaired?
Yeah, sure. In the world of ENTs, probably the most common repair that we see would be furniture, just because it's something that is pretty common and ubiquitous. Everybody's got wooden chairs, tables, dressers, armoires, that kind of stuff. And they break down with use. If you've had a dining room table for 70 years in your family, it's seen a lot, a lot of gatherings, a lot of young ones, a lot of old ones, a lot of projects. And so oftentimes it's going to be a pretty simple joint repair. A piece of wood fell out. Somebody's, I'm sure lots of you have that chair in your dining room where the support leg is just a little bit, free spinning in the base. So that's probably among the more common one. We do get a fair bit of electronic repairs. Probably in that zone, it would be monitors and TVs and displays. Pretty commonly, it's a simple repair in the power supplies. So the TV or the panel itself works totally fine, but some capacitors have aged out and gone bad, and it's a couple quick solder joints to pop them off and put some new ones in and get them back up and running. And then probably the other common one that we see is going to be remote car starters, just because they see a lot of abuse in and out of pockets. The battery clips will often fall off, and it's again a really quick job to repair those, but less common on the electronic side, just because people make the assumption that it's not repairable, it's not serviceable. You kind of have to already have that mentality that I'm indignant about having to spend $250 on a new remote. I want to try and make this work, or whatever that is, right? And so that's often kind of the group that we see through. But there's many more things that we could repair, and folks just don't know, don't realize that it's an approachable skill.
Oh, Michael, that makes me remember the time not long ago when I programmed my own car remote, and it finally worked, but I was so close to giving up, and I was so angry.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd say that with bikes, I wouldn't say there really is a very single most kind of common repair. Things that tend to, they sort of divides into, oops, I've broken something. So like having a flat tire, or your chain snapping, or your I don't know, some mild catastrophe. on the one hand, to things that are a bit more just kind of general maintenance, you know, people replacing worn out gears, worn out cogs, cleaning the chains, that kind of thing. Oftentimes, yeah, it is just something that kind of comes up because something's gone wrong. But within that realm, there's all sorts of things that it can be. If you forced me, I'd say flat tires, replacing inner tubes or patching inner tubes.
For us, I would say anything to do with zippers, mending, patching holes, split seams. What else? Hems. So pretty standard stuff. If you're short, you purchased something or you acquired something, it's too long, you want to shorten it. Seams will split because it's literally hanging on by a thread or two pieces of thread. Zippers are also very common, and I do end up seeing a lot of that stuff ending up at like the Goodwill bins, or I don't think the thrift shops will actually sell something with a broken zipper, but broken zipper items, I always see those. And usually the garment is completely fine. It just needs a zipper replacement. Zipper replacement. I don't know why people think that the value of a zipper replacement's anywhere between 25 and, you know, it could be $50 depending what type of zipper we're replacing. People feel like that value is way too high and they rather just buy a brand new garment, which you know, if you purchase something for $200, why would you want to purchase that again for $200 or $300 this time around, when you could replace the zipper for 25? So I would say zipper for sure, number one thing that I see a lot of. Hems, split seams, around the crotch area, you know, especially on denim jeans, you get a lot of like wear and tear in those areas. So we see a lot of those always need repairing. People bring in curtains, like any drapery items, upholstery items as well. A lot of people, we don't teach upholstery, but a lot of the principles from sewing also applies to that. So you kind of get a mix, so you can kind of like DIY some, like YouTube some of it. The nice thing about like reupholstering something is that you can use staples and glue and stuff like that. Whereas on a garment, you probably don't really want to do that. You're less reluctant to actually glue, you know, your clothing together. So, but there are a lot of other fixes as well for those who don't want to do those repair, and by using like double-sided tape. There are like double-sided tape type things that allow you to heat set it with an iron to do some of those repairs. But yeah, standard zippers are the huge one.
Thanks. The second part of the question that Andrew asked was, are there any, and I know that Beverly, you mentioned kind of, we produce so much already that it's kind of like a reduce, reuse, recycle triage system for a reason, and we don't want to be producing more. But are there any companies or sources in your particular domains of expertise and fields that do a good job of making products that are built for longevity or repairability?
Being someone who doesn't purchase new items, clothing items, what I would actually look for is the fiber content. Is this natural fiber? Is this something that will break down? So is this cotton? Is this linen? Is this hemp? Is this bamboo? What is it? That is typically what I'm going to look out for. I'm also going to look out for, is it like an Okotex certified manufacturer in terms of the material? Then that way you know that the factory has been completely inspected. So you know that ethic-wise, like the laborers are being paid well, and everything is manufactured according to spec. Another thing I would look out for is, I guess, where they manufacture, not just the textile, but the sewing. Usually you can kind of look up some of this information, like where the factories are and stuff like that. I'm just trying to think what else. In terms of quality, price point doesn't necessarily equate to quality, because you'll have luxury companies that will have a higher price point, but that doesn't mean they, the manufacturing process of it is up quality. The stitching, everything to do with the stitching, is what you want to look at. But I guess that's kind of tough to like tell if you don't really know what you're looking for. But I would say material. Usually material is kind of a good indicator. And I know you could get 100% cotton variations within companies and stuff like that. But typically the material is what I would be looking at, because usually that also means that the standard of manufacturing, the techniques that are going to be put into that garment, is usually higher as well.
And Alex, you mentioned steel frame bicycles. Is there anything else that you look out for within bikes for repairability?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of mentioned this also, but one thing I would be aware of is just if any sort of a new part standard is brought to market and it's being promoted, and you're thinking, okay, do I want to buy this new bike with this new kind of fancy gizmo or new approach to whatever it might be? Just consider, is this likely to stick around? Am I going to be able to find parts in the future? Because you may not. I can name many, weird bike things from the past that kind of came and went, and are now extremely hard to find. If you need to, you may not be able to. I understand that a lot of even kind of relatively recent things, like very wide bottom brackets for fat bikes and things like this, are becoming quite difficult to find in some cases, and those aren't especially old. So that'd be a consideration. I think, like I say, steel frames generally are really a lot more durable if taken care of. Something else to consider is kind of how they're built. And so if you have a bike that is brazed, so it's made with lugs that connect the different parts and brazing rather than welding. If you're a skilled welder, then I'm sure you can do good work on a steel bike. But if it's a lugged bike, it is often easier to separate that joint and replace a whole section of tube or something if you need to. And if you're to compare that, say, to like an aluminum bike, where you need to be a much more skilled welder to work on it, and it's often, I think, just harder kind of from a metallurgical standpoint to do it in a way that is strong. That's a consideration. But then, yeah, there are going to be bikes that are built of better quality metals that tend to be a bit more supple, tend not to kind of be as rigid. They're nicer to ride, and they're also probably just going to last longer because they're less likely to fatigue, things like that. And there are companies out there that make bikes that are particularly strong, kind of industrial type bikes, these types of things, heavy duty bikes. I could come up with a list of names that I'd say, oh, this might be better than that, but I don't think it's that interesting, and I'm not sure that I want to commit myself to anything specific. But yeah, I think do research. Most companies, this is the thing, is that most big bike makers within their offerings are going to have some things that are likely to just last longer and be a little more likely to be around and repairable longer than others. And if you can afford it, getting something really quite nice, like a hand-built bike, say, the manufacturer might not be around, but they tend to be making things that are well made, and then also made in such a way that it can be repaired more easily.
Angelica had this question, which I really like, and I'll just read it out. I know some people see repairing as something you only do if you have to, and you can't afford something new. For example, only those living in poverty mend their clothes or try to fix their electronics. Have any of y'all run into these perceptions in your organization? And how do you combat those stereotypes about the type of people who repair their things, as toxic as those stereotypes might be?
Yeah,
And
oh, go ahead.
go on.
I was gonna say, I think in our world, like in the world of events, it's again a kind of a self-selecting set. Like the folks that show up to our group are interested in the process and learning the hobby or the craft. So we don't see a ton of that, condescension where folks are looking down on the process or the act of the repair. You know, a lot of things I fix myself. I could certainly buy a replacement, but two things: I'm interminably cheap, so I'm mad about having to buy a new one. And also, I often like the challenge, right? So, oftentimes I will try to repair something that I know it is not financially or time resource wise logical to repair, right? But I do it because I enjoy it, and that's an approach that I can do as an individual. But for example, most businesses can't, right? So any business that is paying for somebody's time, like I'm going to go out on a limb and assume, Alex, that just because I know more about the bike world than sewing, but I'm sure the same applies. You repair lots of bikes that don't financially make sense, right? Like if you were running a business where you charged for every hour that you repaired, a great portion of the work that you do would just not make sense, right?
Yeah, and many people, come to us after having been told at a commercial shop, well, we can do that, but it's going to cost this many hundreds of dollars. You might as well
Yep.
get a bike.
Exactly.
Yep, same thing. We also don't really deal with the, everybody who comes to us are wanting to be there and wanting to learn and wanting to take things into their own hands. Really rare do I encounter people who think opposite of that. When I meet those people, those are typically consumer of fashion at a very rapid speed, and they already don't understand anything to do with repair. I come from a very DIY family, so I've always learned to do everything that I can, and we teach that as well at the House of Sew, and it's kind of like buy well and take care of it. There's a saying, but now I can't even remember what it is. It is something along those lines about really, really, I will painstakingly research and take my time in a purchase. It could be something that only costs $50. I just don't want to have to buy that $50 thing all over again, or that $5 things. I just want to buy it one time and have it last as long as I can. And I tend to teach that way as well. If we're going to make purchases, first ask yourself, do you need this item? And how many wears or how much usage are you going to get out of it? And if you do find yourself needing it, wanting it, and getting use out of it, how long do you think you're going to keep it for? Or how are you going to take responsibility in the end of life of that item? Like, are you going to pass it on? Are you, going to is it being passed on to someone within your community, or is it going to be donated? So typically we get people who already want to be doing this for themselves, for their community, I guess for the world.
As a follow-up question, I think y'all are, in some ways, when it comes to me at least, and I imagine a lot of the participants that have shown up, it's kind of preaching to the choir. There's that self-selecting aspect where we do love working with our hands, figuring out a bit of a challenge. Maybe there's a bit of resentment at having to buy something again or something being poorly made. But do you have or have you encountered, I know Beverly, you mentioned visible mending. Have you encountered any methods of kind of advocating to people that don't, this kind of DIY mentality doesn't come naturally to, within your organization, within your domain, of kind of advocating for how worthwhile repair is, or how meaningful or how much value can be added when you are taking these jobs on yourself?
I guess just like, you know, like everything in my life, you can't force these ideals to people. All you can do is just really talk and have conversations about it. I find that usually that method kind of opens them up into, you know, these other possibilities. So it's not trying to sell anything, but rather, kind of talk about my experience with things, or like the fact that instead of trying to figure out how I could attain this, you know, $1,000 dress, I could learn to make it myself and make it even better, at a fraction of that price. So usually I'll kind of weigh out options in that way, but um, I usually I usually just talk about it. I usually just talk about it, about my experiences with it, without it being an ideal that I'm trying to push onto someone. So when the time comes, you know, I feel like with repetition and things like that, people will start thinking about that. I have noticed that with several friends where I talked about it a lot, and then they'll talk about something complete, like an experience that I'm completely against, when it comes to purchasing. But over time, I noticed that they'll bring up, they're like, oh, yeah, you talk about this thing so much. You talk about sustainability so much. I started thinking about that a lot more. And now I started like thrifting or something like that. So I feel like it's just repetition, repetition without, you know, shoving it down someone's throat, because nobody wants to do something that you're telling them to do. It has to be, it's a lifestyle thing. It needs to be incorporated, kind of like a diet. Healthy eating shouldn't be a diet related thing. It should be a lifestyle thing.
Yeah, I think personally, you know, there's going to be people out there that don't want to do it themselves, but they do want to, or they're curious about it, but they just feel uncomfortable, or, you know, they don't have any kind of background or experience that makes it like an intelligible thing to do. And I think, you know, trying to show those people that, yeah, you can come and do these things, and it's not actually as steep a learning curve as you might think. That's the kind of, I think, work that we're all, sounds like, pretty excited about here. Personally, though, I think that there's people out there that just don't particularly want to be repairing things, don't want to do it themselves, and that's entirely fine. And I think one of the reasons it's fine is that means that there's work, you know, local work, good work for people who do want to do those things. You know, it doesn't have to be as a volunteer service, or as a you know, something that's offered for free or for cheap. There's lots of, I'm hoping, good opportunities for people to offer that kind of skill and repair people's products, save them money, but make a little bit of a living themselves. And if others are happy to pay for everything, that's a good thing too.
Speaking of growing, say, the repair community in Edmonton, or inviting more people in, Robin asked, would any of you have any advice for starting up a clothing or accessories repair service in Edmonton, or are there existing networks for repair? They mentioned that Edmonton had the volunteer-run repairathon events until COVID, so they're just looking for suggestions, kind of ways to connect with that, if you know of any.
Yeah, I know of the repairathon that you're talking about, because I'm part of Fashion Revolution and they would volunteer and do that. The only issue I have with that is that someone else is doing the work for free, and the people dropping it off are not actually doing the work. So I don't think like it's like I don't think the message is actually like coming across, I guess, in some ways. But if we're talking about starting, like, you know, there are a number of alteration specialists around. Are we talking about for-profit or not for-profit? Because the U of A Human Ecology program, they offer I think it's like, I don't know if it's every Saturday, but they do run a repair, like a community repair event where they have supplies laid out, you can bring in your garments and you learn how to do that. So that could be something we might want to look into having a lot more of. You know, even like an hour, 2 hours or something, where we go into like a community space to teach other people or to share. It is actually a sharing event as well. You can learn different techniques from other participants there. So it just depends. Are you looking to do something for profit, or are you looking to do something like not for profit? Definitely would need lots of volunteers for that are skilled to help out with things like that. Yeah, I would say getting a group of people together who kind of have some sort of a skill. I don't even think you really need to have that, you know, in depth. It's just the desire or the passion to want to repair and to do it as a group activity. That would be a great start.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm really not familiar with the organization. I know somebody who volunteers there, so I'm not endorsing it necessarily. But I know there's a group in Edmonton called Blenders Garment Recyclers, and I'm not sure if you guys know about it, perhaps more than I do. And that sounds like something that would be a little bit relevant to what this person was asking, maybe. But again, I'm not really sure entirely what they do.
Blenders, I initially consulted on that project. So Sarah approached me and I gave her the idea to do something like the Goodwill bins, where people come in and purchase things by the pound. So they do run some basic workshops and classes and stuff like that. And yeah, it would be a good space to, you know, host something like that as well.
Ken asked about not having any experience in repair or fixing things at all. So he's looking for ways that they can contribute. We are running to the end of our time. It is now 8:30. So I will just highlight Michael at the Edmonton New Technology Society. Alex is at Bike Edmonton. Beverly is at House of So. You can get in touch with them there. Please get in touch with us at makerspace@epl.ca. Someone in the chat just threw out the Edmonton Tool Library, which is a great initiative and that we'd love to see supported. Blenders Garment Recyclers is in there as well. And if you missed any of this, there will be a recording. And again, feel free to reach out to certainly us, and hopefully some of the other panelists would welcome that as well, for questions and other comments. It's been really great hosting all of you. Thank you very much for sharing your time and your knowledge with all of us. I really look forward to seeing all the different ways that the repair community in Edmonton moves forwards and connects further. We don't have like a hard limit on time, so if anyone wants to say any kind of final wrap-up remarks that we didn't get out earlier, please feel free to. And once those are done, then we will shut the Zoom hosting off, and hopefully we'll see you in one of our spaces sometime soon.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. I think, Alex, you dropped a note there. There's many thank yous running by in the chat there, but the Bike Edmonton team does have a volunteer onboarding program to take on, Ken's question there. As far as an idea of how to get involved, I would say start with a real world problem that you have, and then try and find the right person to help you, address that. So if it's garment repair, obviously Bev and the team at House of Sew would be a great place. If it was something more furniture or electronics based, you can definitely pop by ENTS on one of our open tour nights. We generally do tours on Tuesday evenings, and that's a great time to drop in and just kind of see what we're doing and say, I've got this thing. Do you think that's something that we could repair? And I'm sure somebody will be able to engage with you on that.
Absolutely. It's kind of a win-win situation. Either choose something that you care about and you want to see fixed, or choose something that's low stakes and you can fail a lot and it doesn't matter, and it lowers the barrier to starting this DIY thing and repair thing yourself. That is all for us tonight. One last round of thank yous to everyone for participating. It's been lovely having you, and hope you all take care and have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.